Hi, I'm Sam from beadshop.com, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to make our multi-stranded constellation bracelet in addition to a matching set of earrings. Let's get started by going over the materials we'll be needing for this project. So the first thing we're going to do is gather all of our supplies for the project, and all of the supplies that can be seen here are available for purchase on our website beadshop.com. The first thing you're going to need is some sort of design tray, one preferably with troughs like this so that you can lay out your beads in a pattern and use them for stringing very easily. Right now we're using our ultimate design board in Dove Gray. You're also going to need some wire wrapping tools, which include chain nose pliers, bent nose pliers, round nose pliers, and a good pair of flush cutters. For stringing your bracelet, you're going to want some flexible eye needles. These needles are very important for working with gemstones because they are small enough to fit through the holes of most of them, but they also have this really large eye that you can thread very easily that will then collapse once you've pulled it through the gemstone. So they're a really handy tool to have when working with these particular kinds of beads. You're also going to want some GS Hypo cement to help secure your knots. And one item that we don't sell on beadshop.com, but you should have lying around your house, is some Scotch tape, and that's just going to help us with our stringing. As far as the materials go for this project, the first thing you're going to need is your beads. And one of the strands of this bracelet is comprised of gemstones. So you're going to want a strand of your favorite gemstone. And some of them, as you can see, come in solid colors, and some of them come variegated. And in this video we're going to go over how to pattern with the variegated strands, but you can use whatever kind of gemstones you like. So we're going to use the smoky quartz for this video. And the other beads you're going to need are some small metal beads. And in this video I use our Ethiopian beads that we call out of Africa. They're really tiny little metal seamed beads. But you could also get away with using a different kind of metal bead. Here, for example, are our native seeds. And these are slightly larger and more consistently shaped. So if you prefer to go for a different look, you can certainly feel free to. And it's really helpful to have some containers to hold your beads in. So here are our out of Africa and our metal beaded triangles. We really like these triangles because they fit in this trough in your design board, and you can stack them easily. For completing the extender chain on your bracelet and creating your earrings, you're going to want 5 briolets. Here we have our smoky quartz briolets, and you'll need 1 for your bracelet and 4 more for your earrings. To finish tying off your bracelet, you're going to want some end tips. You can see it here, and I used our clamshell style end tip with a 0.026 millimeter hole in them. You're going to need some chain for finishing that extender chain and for your earrings, and we sell it by the foot on beadshop.com, and 1 foot is plenty for this project. This is our circle back chain. You're going to want a little clasp. We use our little lobster clasp. Some petite little clasp will do. And you're going to want some ear wires for your earrings. And these are some sterling silver ones that we sell. You're also going to need some wire for your wire wrapping. In this video I can get away with using 24 gauge with all of my beads and briolets. But because not all gemstones are drilled equal and we can't always guarantee that they'll fit through one particular gauge of wire, I would also recommend having some 26 gauge wire on hand. That's the next smallest size, and just in case any of your beads are drilled a little bit tinier, you're going to be happy you have another size of wire hanging around. And if you'll notice, I used all of my metallic components for this project in silver. I wanted to match my metals. You can certainly feel free to mix your metals or use a different flavor, but I just wanted to point out that for this particular project we're using only silver. And the last thing you're going to need is your stringing material. I used micro C-lon in the color Cocoa. You want to pick a color that is that it relatively matches your gemstones. Since most gemstones are fairly transparent, they're going to pick up whatever color you string them with, so you're going to want it to match the color that they already are. So now that we have all of our supplies gathered, let's get started on our project. So the first thing we're going to do is take our ultimate design board and use the grooves in it to lay our beads out in the pattern we'd like to string them in. For this sample, we're using these smoky quartz rondelles, and they gradate from light to dark. So we're going to use that to our advantage and make a bracelet that kind of ombres from light to dark and back to light again. Before we do that, however, I want to talk a little bit about measurement. This is a sample that I made in garnet, and as you can see, it's a little bit larger than 7 inches from this lovely little ruler that is marked on your design tray. I have a 6-inch wrist, so this bracelet with the extender chain fits me a little bit loosely, kind of like the labradorite sample that I'm wearing right now. My rule of thumb for how long your gemstone strand should be is that it should be 1 inch shorter than the length of your wrist. Because you're adding this extra chain at the end, you're going to be able to adjust it to be tighter or looser to your comfort. But to get a bracelet that has a good average fit, you want your gemstone length to be 1 inch shorter than your wrist circumference. So for me, that's 5 inches, and you can see that right here. So, to pattern my smoky quartz rondelles, I want to make sure I have about 5 inches of gemstones, and that's about 2 of the sections. It might be a little bit more or less for you, so plan accordingly. But the easiest way to lay them out is to cut your strand. We're going to pull some beads off. And then I'm going to separate the sections. So right here where the color changes dramatically, I'm going to pull the beads out. And I'm going to take the strand and flip it over and set the other section right next to it. So you can see I have this nicely graduated pattern of color that's going to work really well for my little gemstone bracelet. Now, all we need to start our beading is our little tray full of our Out of Africa silver beads. We're going to need our micro C-lon, and I'm going to cut about 2 feet of it. We're going to put a bit of Scotch tape on the end of it, and this is just going to be our stopper so none of our beads slide off the end while we're stringing. And then we're going to thread it onto one of our flexible eye needles, which has this really large eye, so it shouldn't be too hard to thread. And you're going to pull a few inches through, 3 to 4, and then you're going to kind of pull your needle tight because this needle is so fine, the wire is really thin, it can damage your thread a little bit, so you want to avoid having your thread move around in the eye of the needle too much. It's kind of good to keep it in the same place. But now we're ready to get started on our stringing pattern. So to start our gemstone strand, we are going to take 2 of our little Out of Africa beads and put them all the way down towards the tape. The thing to know about the Out of Africa beads is that they are not fully round. They have little seams in them. So for the most part, they're not going to fall off your micro C-lon. They're closed very well, but every once in a while you're going to get a bead that has a larger seam and it might fall off your micro C-lon, and that's okay. You can just pick it up and put it to the side and move on. You're not going to find too many of those. So now we're going to start putting gemstones on our strand at random intervals. So I think I'm going to start with 3. The thing about the flexible eye needle is that it's not really stiff enough to pick up gemstone beads, so you usually have to pick them up and put them on one at a time, which sometimes can prove more difficult. There we go. But it is necessary to use this needle because any larger needle will have a tough time going over the gemstones. Alright, so I have 3 beads with 2 little Out of Africas, and now I'm going to put another little silver bead on. And the reason that I named these bracelets constellation bracelets is because these little tiny metal beads are like stars in between your gemstones. So now I'm going to put another random amount of beads on. This time I think I'll do 4. Sometimes you'll get a gemstone that is harder to pull over the head of the needle. That one went on with little struggle. But if you ever meet one that doesn't want to go on, it's probably going to either break the gemstone or break your needle, and it's best just to leave it alone and move on from it. Oop. Oh, now that one went on too. Okay. So you can start to see the color gradating. And I'm going to put on another little silver bead. And you're going to continue in this way until you've finished stranding your bracelet. Now I'm going to do 2. And you're going to get some beautiful asymmetry with not repeating the exact same number of beads over and over again. Whoops, dropped that one. So you're going to continue doing this until you've used up all of your gemstones. So once you have all of your gemstones strung with the little out of Africa beads, you're going to want to do a quick measurement check. And since we've added extra silver beads, my gemstones look like they're a little bit longer. Up to about a quarter of an inch, you're okay, but if you added any more length than that, I would recommend taking some gemstones off to adjust your length. But it looks like I'm only a quarter of an inch over, so that's just fine. And you're also going to want to take another 2-foot piece of C-lon and string some out of Africa beads on it. A little bit longer than your other strand of gemstones. And this is going to make up the second strand of your bracelet. So once you have your 2 strands completed, we're now ready to put the end tips on the bracelet. So because we have such neutral colored thread for this particular bracelet, I decided to go onto a more contrasting background to show you exactly how we put the end tip on. So this is our end tip. It consists of 2 little cups that are hinged together, and they have a hook on one end. And I don't know if you can see this or not, but in between the hinge is a little hole, and it is through this little hole, oops, there we go, that we'll be threading both of the threads through. And then we're going to tie a knot on this side, and it's going to rest in between the 2 sides of the cups. So let's just show you how this is going to work. Before we do anything, we want to connect our 2 strands together. The way that we're going to do this is by threading the gemstone strand through the last out of Africa silver bead on the solid silver strand. And because these beads have such larger holes than gemstones, you can usually do this without a needle, just by putting the 2 threads together and sliding them. And as you can see, now the 2 strands are connected. If I were to let them be pulled tight up until they're tape, you would be able to see that. Let me pull the out of Africa strand. So you can see that the 2 strands are connected, and they have this little bead that kind of graduates into both strands. But we're not going to tie our knot this close to the end of the bracelet. We want to make sure we have enough room for tying on the other end tip, which is why you want to make sure you have enough thread when you do this process. You don't want to run out, because you'll just have to rethread everything all over again. So don't be stingy with your thread. So we're going to take both the strands and thread them through the end tip. So if you want to see what that looks like, I'm just going to pull it tight so we can kind of get an idea for what it looks like before we tie the knot. You can see that the hook and the cups are pointing away from the strands of beads. And you can see how it's going to attach. So we don't need to tie it that close to the end, though. That doesn't leave us any room on the other side to tie our other end tip. So we're going to tie our knot closer up here to the top. It's easier if both of your ends are close together. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to tie an overhand knot, just a simple overhand knot. And before we pull it tight, we're going to go back through that overhand knot a few more times. And I like to go back through it 4 more times. So 4. And then I kind of hold the knot while I pull it tight to keep it compact. You can see it makes kind of a long knot. If you want to shorten it, you can separate the ends on both sides and pull it tight. So you can see that knot got a little bit rounder there. And you can also, if you're having trouble getting your knot to not be so skinny, because if it's a really skinny knot, it's just going to slide through the hole at the end of the end tip. You can also take your chain nose pliers and kind of squish the knot into place. There we go. That, I would say, is a pretty good knot. So I'm going to test it real quick to make sure it'll hold up from the end tip. So you want to give it a good few yanks. It's not going through at all, which is excellent. So now I'm going to take my GS Hypo Cement, and I'm going to put a little dot of glue on that end tip knot. Closing the Hypo Cement can sometimes be the hard part. I'm going to wait for that glue to dry. And as soon as the glue has dried, I'm under a hot studio lamp now, so it's going to dry a little bit quickly. I'm going to give the knot what we call a crew cut. So you leave a little bit of thread at the top. You don't want to cut it flush because then the knot will find a way to work itself out. And once you pull that end tip flush, whoop, you can see how the knot's going to rest in between those 2 cups. And you can pull your gemstones back, as well as your silver African beads. And you can start to see the bracelet taking shape. So now that we have one of our end tips on, we're going to put the other one on. And this part is a little bit more tricky just because we want to make sure that our bracelet strands are exactly the right length. So if you remember, I told you to put on more out of Africa beads than your gemstones, so it's a little bit longer. And here is where we're going to be taking some beads off. So you can take the tape off the other ends of your bracelet threads. And you can see when I'm laying them down next to each other that I can take a few beads off. I'm going to try taking 2 off. Because remember, we're also going to be putting your gemstone strand through the last bead on your Out of Africa strand. And one of the easiest ways to line your beads up next to each other is to take your bracelet and hold it up vertically. But that's kind of hard to show in the video, so I'm going to do it flat for you to see here. But if you're ever struggling with this, I would highly recommend holding them vertically and letting gravity do the work for you. So I'm looking at this now, and it actually looks like they're both at exactly the same length. So I'm going to take one of those Out of Africa beads that I took off the strand and thread both of the strands through it so that I can join my strands together. And it looks like one of these could use a little bit of a cut. It was fraying a little bit. Okay. Whoop. Didn't lose it there, thankfully. Okay. So it looks like when I pull everything tight that my bracelets are going to work together. Again, this is a lot easier when you hold it vertically and let gravity do the work. The other thing to keep in mind with these silver Out of Africa beads is that because they're uneven, they will kind of go a little jagged and settle into each other in an asymmetrical pattern. So you really want to make sure that they are flush up against each other when you're doing this. Not so tight that they're going to be stiff on your bracelet, but snug, so that when you actually put your end tip on, they don't settle into each other and leave some exposed thread on your bracelet because you didn't have them pulled tight enough. So now we're going to take our other end tip, and we're again going to want the cups and the hooks facing away from your bracelet. I'm going to turn the bracelet in the other direction because I'm right-handed and that's easier for me. And I'm going to thread both of the strands through it. So I want to lay my bracelet out flat. And you want to make sure that when you're tying this knot, you're not tying it so tight, again, that your gemstones and beads end up so close to each other that they're stiff and they don't drape nicely across your wrist as a bracelet. You can't quite try this one on as you go, but if it helps you, you can kind of bend the bracelet a little bit while you're tying your knot to keep it from being too stiff once you've tied it. And the way we tie our end tip knot for the second side, we want to make sure we don't catch the hook in this, but we're going to separate the two strands and do an overhand knot just like we did on the last time. So one overhand knot, and then we're going to loop it around 4 times. 3, 4. And you want to pull it tight so that your gemstones and your out of Africa beads have a stopper. And then this only makes up half of our knot, so we want to tie it again. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we do it twice on this side because we're doing only a single thickness of the thread instead of a double. Now you can see that my end tips are both on the bracelet. You want to give it a quick little yank. Make sure that it's not going to come through. And again, you're going to put a little dab of glue on that knot. Wait for it to dry. And you want to give your little knot a crew cut. And you have the stranded part of your bracelet finished. So now we're ready to put the finishing touches on your bracelet. This is going to involve some wire wrapping. So we're going to do all of the wire wrapping portion of the video at once and then assemble everything once we're done. You can see from my finished bracelet that not only do we have this bracelet on this extender chain, but the lobster clasp is attached to the end tip with this wire wrapped bead unit. So we're going to take one of our extra rondelles, which you should have several from that strand that you took in the beginning, and use that as this bead unit. Since this is one of those strands of gemstones that has multiple colors, I'm going to keep within my pattern. So it's going from dark in the center to light on the outside. So I'm going to choose one of the light colored beads as this bead unit. I'm also going to need my little lobster clasp, and I'm going to need my 24 gauge wire, as well as all of my wire wrapping tools. So the first thing you're going to do is cut off a good sized piece of wire. I cut off about 5 to 6 inches. You may need more or less depending on your level of experience. And depending on your level of experience, I am going to show all the steps for the wire wrapping today, but I'm not going to go into great detail. So if you do not know how to wire wrap a bead unit, or you need a little refresher course, I would highly recommend watching our video titled How to Wire Wrap a Bead Unit. So the first thing you're going to do is take a pair of chain nose pliers and grip the wire a few inches down from the top and fold it back at a 90-degree angle. You're then going to take your round nose pliers and you're going to grip that angle with the top of the jaw free, so you can lift the top of the jaw. And the further up you grip in the pliers, the larger your loop is going to be. Since this is a tiny bead and we don't want a disproportionate loop, we're going to grab it nearer to the this end of the pliers. And you're going to wrap your wire directly forward. You're going to let go with the bottom jaw, twist back, and you're going to continue to wrap around to the back. And there's your little loop. Super easy. I then take my bent nose pliers, and these are what we use so that our wrist doesn't get sore while we're wire wrapping. If you do a lot of wire wrapping, these are a great investment. They just allow you to hold the wire at a comfortable angle with your left wrist, or your right wrist if you're right-handed. You'll take your chain nose, and you're just going to pull the wire around and make about 2 wraps. You don't need any more than that because it's just a tiny little bead and we don't want the wire wrap to overwhelm our bead. And before you cut the wire, always make sure to cover it. You don't want any stray pieces of wire hitting you in the eye. You might need to tuck that little end of your wire in. But now you have your first wire wrap done. I can do a little bit of a better job of tucking that wire in. It's all about patience with wire wrapping. There we go. Okay. So now you want to take your bead and you're going to want to thread it onto your wire. Now you can see it sitting on there. You're going to go through the same steps again, this time with the bead on there. So again, you're going to grab it and bend it back at a 90-degree angle. I like to grab it as near to the tips of the pliers as I can so I don't get a huge angle. I don't want to be doing a really long wire wrap. Again, with the round nose pliers, you try to make a loop that is approximately the same size as the other one you just made. And this time, before you close your loop with the wire wrap, you're going to open it up a little bit and put your clasp on. So you can see that the clasp is now on the loop, and I'm going to close up that loop before I continue wire wrapping. So it's going to take a little bit of practice to wire wrap with your clasp in this little loop, but you will get the hang of it. It might take a few tries. The hardest part is just grabbing it. There we go. You're going to take your wire, and again, we're just going to do about 2 wire wraps. There we go. And again, make sure that while we're cutting it, we're covering up the wire. And you're going to want to take that little end and bend it in with your pliers. But once you're done, you'll have this little bead unit that you'll be able to hook onto your end tip once you are completely done with all of your wire wrapping. So now we're ready to do the bracelets on our bracelet, and you're going to need 5 of them for this process if you want to make both the bracelet and the earrings. So take one of your bracelets. You're also going to need your craft wire again. You're going to want to cut off another 6-inch piece or so. Oop, kept missing it. You're going to thread your bracelet on about 1.5 inches, if you can see. And for this part, some people like to use pliers. I like to use my fingers because I feel like I can get a tighter fit. But you are going to cross the wires over the top of the bracelet. And again, here I'm going to show you the steps for wire wrapping a bracelet, but I'm not going to go into extreme detail. So if you need a refresher or would like to know a little bit more on wire wrapping bracelets, you can watch our video, How to Wire Wrap a Bracelet. So after I've crossed these wires, I'm going to then pinch them together up at the top, kind of straight. And I find I can get a tighter fit with my fingers than with a pair of pliers. But some people like to take their chain nose pliers and pinch right here. So whatever works best for you. Alright, now that I have that part done, it's going to be very similar to the wire wrap we just did. You're going to grip above the bracelet with your chain nose pliers and fold it back at a 90-degree angle. Then you're going to take your round nose pliers, and again, the further up you go, the larger the loop will be. We want to keep our loops consistent, so we're going to wrap, close. And this little wire that's sticking up at the top, you just need to ignore it. Don't wrap your wire around it at all, but don't let it get in your way. So now you can see kind of behind that wire, I have my first little loop. And at this point in time, I could thread the chain on and finish my wire wrap. But since I have to do 5 of these bracelets, I like to do it in an assembly line. So I'm going to do the other 4 before I put them on the chain. So now that you have your bracelets with their little loops closed, you can put a few of them on your design board, and we're going to start wire wrapping them to the piece of chain you have. You don't need very much chain for this project. A foot will make more than enough for one set of earrings, and a bracelet you can make multiples out of it. So you're going to take the end of your chain, that last link, and you're going to thread it onto this big long wire onto your bracelet. If you need to, you can open the loop like I taught you before, but with this chain it's very delicate, you might not have to. And you're going to, still ignoring this little extra piece of wire, you're going to grip your loop. You're going to wire wrap around everything. And with the chain in the way, it sometimes can be hard to get the grip that you want, but I think I've got a good one here. You're going to take your chain nose, and you're going to start wrapping your bracelet. And depending on the look you want, you can wrap all the way down over the top of your bracelet, or you can do just a few wire wraps to kind of cap the top, which I'm going to do, I think. So you can see I did about 4 wraps here. It just caps the bracelet. You could go down as far as you want though. And you're going to take your flush cutters, and I'm going to peel this wire back a little bit. You want to cut the wire in the middle of the bracelet and not on either side, because if you cut it on the side, it's going to be easier for it to catch on something, and we don't want that. So I'm going to do my best to cut this wire. There we go. You can take your chain nose, kind of compress it down. And now all you have left is this little wire sitting at the top of your bracelet. And what we're going to do is we're just going to bend it down at a 90-degree angle and cut it off as flush as we can. And then you have this beautiful dangling gemstone. Now at this point, if you were working on your extender chain, you would just stop here and attach the chain as it is. Or if you were making a pair of earrings, I have one pre-made here, you would attach another bracelet for chain rings up. And I've already cut the chain here, you can see. Let me set this down. But maybe it'll be easier to show you on this one. So you would go 4 chain links up, 1, 2, 3, 4, thread another bracelet on, and do the same wire wrapping that we just did, and that's for the earrings. So once you have all your bracelet wrapping done, we can learn how to attach everything to their final components. So now that you've finished wire wrapping your bracelets, we're ready to put the finishing touches on your project. And we're going to start by completing our bracelet. So where we left is our end tips are open and ready to be hooked onto our components. And before we hook them, we're going to need to close this little end tip. So it looks kind of like a clamshell. You're just going to take your chain nose pliers and gently squeeze them shut. You can see it's now shut, and what it's doing is protecting that knot that you tied from any wear and tear, and that is a great thing. We're going to do that to the same. We're going to do the same steps to the other side. Just close them off, and now you can see there's no exposed thread on your bracelet, so it's going to be safe to wear it. You're not going to worry about it breaking. So the first side, we're going to take this little wire wrapped clasp that we made and just hook it over the end tip. Now for closing the end tip, I find it easiest to use my round nose pliers. And you're going to grip the end tip close to the base, grip the hook, and you're going to bend it back a little bit, almost opening it up more. And then you're going to grip the tip of it and just roll it forward. You might have to re-grip it a few times so that it meets up with itself again. You don't want it to pull out for this bracelet. But now you can see that the clasp isn't going to come off. It's not going to slide off because there's no gap here where you close the end tip. So you have the first side of your bracelet done. Now we're going to work on adding a bracelet extender chain to the other side of our bracelet. And I cut this chain and left it a little bit long because we're going to want to adjust based off the size of your wrist. And this is a good point in time to take your bracelet, lay it on your wrist, and see how well it fits. It's kind of hard to do this one-handed, but if I pinch mine together, it fits pretty well. So I don't need an incredibly long extender chain. The one I'm wearing on my wrist is only 5 links long. So I'm going to do that same amount with this bracelet. So I'm going to cut 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll cut the 6th one. And make sure to cut the length that is appropriate for your bracelet. There is no right answer here. So I have this little tiny chain, and I'm going to hook the last link onto the end tip and go through the same process of closing the end tip. So I'll roll it back a little bit, grab the tip, and roll it forward till it meets itself at the base. So now we can lay out our bracelet, and the bracelet is all done. Now that we've done the bracelet, we're ready to take our extra bracelets and turn them into a pair of beautiful earrings. So here I have a pair that I wire wrapped together, and I'll try to lay them out so you can see that I wire wrapped the second one 4 chain rings up. You're going to need another chain ring above that to attach to your ear wire, and then you're going to be able to cut your chain off. So I'm going to cut this little loop right here, which is 5 wires above, and I'll open that up, and now we have this little piece of bracelets that's ready to be put onto an ear wire. So these ear wires open very simply. You see this loop at the bottom that's covered by this sterling bead. All you need are your chain nose pliers, and you can just rotate them open, much like how we were opening our wire wraps before. So then I'm going to take these bracelets on their chain, and I'm going to thread it through that last chain link that I left open. So now you can see them dangling on the earring, but before they're complete, I gotta close this loop. Same way, just a gentle twist. And then you have your earring. You would do the same to your other earring. So you have now a pair of matching earrings with your beautiful constellation bracelet. So all of these supplies can be found at our website, beadshop.com, as well as many other color palettes and variations of this project. So if you enjoyed this video, I would encourage you to take a look at our site and see what else you can find there. Thank you.